Hey!
Hey to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to this edition of Hypnosis Week. The gentleman you can see on screen if you're on the video channel. Obviously, if you're on iTunes, Apple, or any of the other audio podcasts, you can't see his face. So perhaps after listening to this, you'll want to pop over to YouTube and be able to watch his body language and facial expressions as well. But the gentleman I want to introduce you to this week is currently based in India, although he is from England. He is in India the current president of the NLP, which is the Association of Neuro-Linguistic Programming. We'll go into that more very shortly. He lectures regularly at Indian colleges, universities, corporate companies and stuff. Again, we'll get into that shortly. I've got loads of bullet points here that I could tell you about, but I'm not going to tell you them all. I'm going to let him explain. But let's just say this gentleman in 1969, I'm sure he won't mind me saying that, given it's on his own website, got his, and the reason I'm doing the rabbit ears, for people on the audio, I've just done rabbit ears symbol in the air, because I'm just going to say that he's genuine. And I'm doing that not because it isn't a genuine psychology degree. It's just, as you know, frankly, I think psychology degrees are not worth the paper they're printed on. No offence to anyone. It's just what they teach you in a degree bears, in my opinion and experience, next to no relation to what happens in the real world when you actually get out there with people. But we'll definitely be talking about that. The gentleman in question is also a martial arts expert. He's got a 4th dan black belt in judo, a 1st dan in aikido. Nearly slipped up there. Get a new set of teeth. He's got a background also in teaching, and for a short while was a deputy head of a boarding school for maladjusted pupils in Surrey. He is qualified as an actual clinical psychologist, so actually, proper psychology degree route, as in proper university, not diploma paper mill style. But he is best known when you go looking on the internet for NLP, hence we'll obviously be talking about things like that. His website links will be below this video and also below the audio on the podcast. So without further ado, the gentleman I'd like to introduce you to is Dr. David John Lincoln. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Jonathan, and welcome for having me.
Well, thanks for agreeing. Look, the first question I ask everyone is the obvious one. It's the age-old cliched one, but it's the one that at least then viewers and listeners can get to know you. What was your journey from even before 1969 when you did your psychology degree? What led you to doing that and then going from there to where you are now?
Okay, well, it was a very simple journey. I started in around about 69, 70 after the degree as a school teacher, because in those days, many years back, all you needed to teach was a degree. Now, of course, you need to have a diploma in education and all sorts of other things. And because of my martial arts, and I was also into rock climbing and various other sports, I was appointed as a PE teacher into what was then called a middle school, not quite the middle school we know. It's just that in Croydon, this is in South London, when they went into comprehensive education, they didn't have schools big enough, so they split it. So they had 11 to 14 and 14 to upwards, and this was an 11 to 14. In fact, it was called Ingram High School. I believe it's still going in Thornton Heath in Croydon, and I did that for 2 or 3 years, and I found that teaching was not me. I'm more of in NLP terms, a rapport builder. I like to get to know people very well. And in the teaching in those days, it was hands off, In fact, the thing that sent me out of teaching was the words the headmaster said when we had a bit of a problem with one of the students. He said, "Mr. Lincoln, you are paid to teach, not to care." And I didn't like that. See, so I decided, well, I'll go and get into the care profession. So from there, I went to a school which you may have heard of in Red Hill. I don't know if it's still going, called the Royal Philanthropic Community Home and Care. This was all a mouthful. Yeah, this was all the changeover, what was known as the 1969 Children's and Young Persons Act, which effectively did away with prisons and approved schools for kids and put them all into care homes. So from there, from the care home and so on, I spent a few years there. I also was involved with Longgrove Regional Adolescent Unit at Longgrove Hospital in Epsom. And then I popped over, started to go to America, which became my second home for a little while. And I was in a place that called Kansas, where nobody goes to, except, of course, the Yellow Brick Road. Dorothy, she was there.
Yeah.
And whilst in Kansas, I fell in love with naturopathy, and I did naturopathy training in a place called Mapleton, which is right on the border of Kansas and Oklahoma. And at the same time, I was continuing with my psychology. And I did a PhD based on mind-body connection, and at the same time did my ND, which was based on something called SOUP, Our Salvation, SOS. See, very clever,
Okay.
SOUP, Our Salvation. And then around about the, let me think now, it must have been around about 1990s, I got involved with NLP. A sort of back doorway. I had a girlfriend at the time, and she took me sort of dragging and screaming to an NLP open program with me saying, oh no, it's just pop psychology, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, from there, I thought, well, this is a bit interesting. And in those days, you could do a weekend because the first course was 20 days. So you had a weekend introduction, and somehow I got into the 20 days. Now, at the end of the 20-day certified practitioner course, I was still yelling, pop psychology, won't work in the real world, load of rubbish. And I went back to America. And while because I was still studying my ND in those days, it took a long time to do the ND. And whilst in America, I was taking on patients because it's very easy to get psychology patients in America. I'm not going to say anything about what they are. I certainly don't want to bring in Donald Trump and all his followers at this time. Although I've just done it, but anyway. So I was quite easy to get patients. And of course, patients used to boast about having a psychologist, you see. And I had extra boasting rights because my patients could say, I've got a British psychologist.
Yeah.
So the very first patient I had coming along, and I can only say it this way, I found myself doing NLP on them. And it was working. And the voice of my trainer, the person who trained me, was in my ear at the time. And we always used to say, and still do in NLP, is that if you do something with somebody and it works, it's NLP. If you do something that doesn't work, it's psychology or psychotherapy or any other name you want to put to it. So after that, I thought, that was great. I'll come back and I'll do the masters. And by the way, just as an aside, and I don't think you mind me telling you, but on the practitioner and the master practitioner was a young man who was a bank manager. And when we were introducing ourselves, he stood up and he said, I'm a bank manager, but I want to be a stand-up comic. Well, we all laughed because we all thought bank managers were stand-up comics, you know. And then we went to the master practitioner. He said the same thing. He got up again. He happened to do the same one as me. It was a year in between. And he said, I've got my first gig. Now, you may wonder who that person is.
I think if it's who you're going to say, because the answer is right now, I don't know for certain, but there is a British comedian who, when I see him perform, I have commented to people when I'm watching him that he is using purposely, and I would argue definitely, in my opinion, was doing it knowing what he was doing rather than accidental, like a lot of people do. Facial anchoring and stuff for getting various areas of the stages right for certain gags and stuff, and that would be Jimmy Carr.
Yes, absolutely. Got it in one. Jimmy Carr.
Oh, yep. I suspect.
Yes, Jimmy Carr. And I stayed connected with him for a little year, but then we drifted off, you know. But after that, so they did master practitioner in London. And then because I was going back and forth from America, I decided to do the trainer's training in America, which I did in California in the year 2000 or 1999. I can't remember off the top of my head, but around the time.
For the benefit of people watching or listening, just to clarify, because obviously we're now in a marketplace where you can go do your training. Well, you can do all the levels of courses with all manner of different people. But back in the day, certainly in the 80s and early 90s, generally speaking, I know there were other people doing it, but generally speaking, most people went and trained with Bandler and or Grinder. So I'm assuming you were on the Bandler.
Well, I had done work with Bandler and Grinder, but my main mentor at that time was, it's gone out of my head. It'll come back to me in a minute. A little short fella.
Not Tad James.
Yeah, Tad James.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
I haven't seen Tad. It seemed to have disappeared over the last year or so, and I think perhaps he's sort of semi-retired or retired. I don't know. But yeah, so Tad James, and there were a lot of other people there. A very big course. They always were big, and became a trainer there. And then the rest, as they say, is history as far as NLP is concerned. Although I did the last trainers training I did as a trainer in England was with Terry Ann Laws, funny enough.
Mental combat.
Yes. And then I came to India. She came to India for a year. I came to India. And then I found there was a great need because the NLP here was awful. In fact, the whole psychology is awful here. It's terrible. I mean, it's back in the dark ages in some of it. And,
well, go on. Let me. As this goes along, I will just butt in occasionally. So please excuse me for appearing rude, but it's just how these free-flowing conversations.
I have a chance to drink my tea while you talk.
Good man. You made me think that you said the psychology is bad there, but you're in India, the land of. I know this is not meant to sound racist to anyone watching or listening, and if you get offended by it, you need therapy, frankly. But you are stereotypically in a land, India, China, lands of mysticism and very ingrained, strong religious beliefs, which there's nothing wrong with. But I would argue that makes our job easier.
The word is guru, the land of the gurus. And there are all types of gurus from, as you say, religious, things like Osha, who went to America and was kicked out, and right up to anybody you can think of. And of course, it has its own history going back 5,000 years or more, with all its idols and its gods. In Hindu, there's like, I don't know the exact number, 365 million gods or something. But you see that the great thing about Hinduism is it isn't a god. There is no god. Everybody's a god. You're a god. I'm a god. Every cell in your body is a god. So it's not really religious in the way that we fully understand it, although Hindu people would object to me saying that. So it is in the land of the gurus, and like NLP trainers, like psychologists, like doctors. There's good ones, there's medium ones, and there's bloody awful ones. And the really bad ones actually show up more here, because every village and every town has a guru of some description or follows the guru. And some of them, were good, some were bad, some were both. But so coming here, following some people that had done NLP here, most of the NLP that was done here was very bad, very poor, very bad quality, not actually true. And then people started to mix and match it all together. And the very common thing, which is very big here, I don't know if it's big in England, is this law of attraction stuff, right? And everybody's mixing the law of attraction in with NLP. And when you think about it, the law of attraction is just one thing. It's just one statement, and that's it. But here, you can become a trainer of law of attraction. You can go through all courses, pay lots of money, and end up a trainer.
Yeah, it's sadly got like that here as well.
Yeah, but who is to say you're a trainer of law of attraction? There is nobody. It's not like, at least in NLP, you've got Bandler and Grinder. And you can trace it back to them, whether you agree with them or not.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I know you said at least you've got them. And no, at the end of the day, as I always say on these shows, it doesn't really matter how you do what you do, because at the end of the day, if you're getting results for your clients and they're happy and you built up a good reputation, then the rest of it's pretty immaterial.
That's right.
So hence... And that's also my get out of jail free card for anyone watching or listening who gets offended by anything I say. But because we are being watched or listened to by people who potentially already do NLP but might want to do the next level, so they might want to contact you afterwards, or they might want to get hold of one of your books and stuff. I am going to play devil's advocate a bit. So you mentioned Bandler and Grinder. Bandler, in my honest opinion, is, and make of this what you will, is without a doubt one of the best con men and stage hypnotists that has ever lived, who very cleverly came up with the name NLP just to get round the laws where he was in terms of not being able to do hypnosis at the time, and has managed to build a wonderful multi-level marketing pyramid scheme of NLP, where you have to pay him every year or every 2 years for your new sealed bit of paper.
It's slightly different now because there are loads of other organisations that don't follow that route.
Well, only because he lost his trademark and NLP.
That's right. Christina Hall took half of his business and so on. But, you know, I thought you were going to say, which I would agree with you more, that Richard Bandler is as mad as a hatter, because he really is a strange person and has some, how can we put this politely? He has some strange thought patterns in his head. He's so anti-psychiatry and psychology, and yet he doesn't really know anything about it. Now, Grinder, on the other way, is much more sort of calm about the whole thing. Grinder has now gone in with Michael Carroll, who I trained with.
New code NLP.
Yeah.
Let's call it something new. And
yeah, well, that was just really effectively was just an advertising gimmick and a promotional ploy. I mean, all new code NLP is the adding of more kinesthetic, more feelings, and some silly little games where you have to say numbers in the right order and that sort of thing. Touch your nose and touch your knees and all that, which has been around for a long time. But no, it's just really, he wanted to separate himself, if you like, from the Mad Hatter to the Mad Professor, and have a separation. So John teamed up with Michael Carroll, who was on my trainer's training when I learned it, and his current wife, Sinclair, Bostic Sinclair, I think her name is.
Yeah.
They now run quite a successful training business. And one of the things I like about John Grinder is the fact that he doesn't now use the word so much NLP and practitioner and master practitioner. He calls his students agents of change, because that's basically what we all are. We're all catalysts to help other people change, whether we're using hypnosis, whether we're using NLP, whether we're using psychotherapy or whatever, other than invasive stuff, of course. We're just helping people to change, to be better that they want to be. And so I think that is a much nicer way of looking at things. By the way,
a better marketing name, definitely.
Yeah. Well, John, Richard Bandler is my age, which is quite old, but John Grinder's 10 years older again. So John is an octogenarian, whereas Richard and I are both septuagenarians, you know. So, in fact, I think I'm a year older than Richard is. So, you know, the thing is, and without making too fine a point on it, they will drift away and other people will come up. And there are some clever people in NLP. I think, for example, there we go, you see, my old age is coming out, not remembering names. But the guy who does all the modelling and the California, what's he called himself? Oh,
British guy.
Yeah, no, American guy. Anyway, there are a lot.
Wyatt Woodsmore?
No, well, Wyatt's sort of semi-retired now. Wyatt and he fell out with a few people. I mean, everybody in NLP, I mean, it's the science of communications, and they all fall out with each other all the time.
I know, it's ridiculous. I've got to tell you, in Rochdale, I'm going back about, I'm currently living in Rochdale in Greater Manchester, England, and there's a hotel here called the Broadfield Hotel. And when Terry Ann Laws was living in Rochdale, she brought over Wyatt Woodsmore to England, to the Broadfield Hotel, and he ran one of his modelling courses.
Yeah.
And it turned out that I'd booked the hotel, the other function room, for a 2-day NLP training. And I had basically the same number of people in my conference room as Wyatt did. That part's immaterial. What's hilarious is, apparently Wyatt's course had already been running for 4 or 5 days prior to the last 2 days were going to be the Saturday and Sunday that mine was taking place in the other room. And I had a ton of people who'd never done any training whatsoever. And by lunchtime on the Sunday, bearing in mind they'd only been with me for a day and a half, and these other muppets, sorry if you're on it, but bloody hell, what you got up to for 7 days, Christ, talk about the blind leading the blind. They had them walking around with their ankles tied together all around the grounds of the hotel. So you'll start to feel the physiology of the other person. They had them doing this for several days to then teach them how to do a verbal modelling pattern that I taught people before lunchtime on the Saturday morning. And my delegates were tying up the students in knots on the Sunday afternoon in the Broadfield Hotel, to the point Wyatt had to come and try and get them out of the room because very rapidly they were realising that they just wasted a week of their life.
I think that was a misinterpretation of Gregory Bateson, you know, the British linguist, who used to say, you don't know somebody until you've walked a mile in their shoes. And so, therefore, tie your shoes together and walk, and then you can walk a mile in their shoes. The other person I've forgotten was Robert Dilts.
Oh, yeah. Sleight of mouth, language.
Yeah, exactly. And Robert Dilts is a thinking man's NLP, and he puts it together. So Robert Dilts, and there's a few others that are coming up that will be the new Bandler and Grinder, for want of better words.
To be honest, of all the names you've mentioned, I mean, I'm fans of them all in certain ways, and I can be devil's advocate-wise critical of them all in certain ways. But Robert Dilts, because of this sleight of mouth and language patterns and stuff, I particularly like, because ultimately it's getting back to what, in a therapeutic context, I know NLP is also used for management training and all this. Therapy-wise, we're getting back more to verbal suggestion there.
Robert was one of my original trainers. He ran a bit on our Master Practitioner, 4 days I did with him. But the thing about Robert, he's never upset anybody. You know, the others have all upset people because they've opened their mouths in the wrong time and said the wrong thing to the wrong place. And loads of them ended up in court. And then we had this British hypnotist guy, what's his name, on the television, Paul McKenna. Paul McKenna, with Richard Bandler, took NLP to court to say that they had the trademark of the whole NLP. And the British NLP, which at that time we're talking about what I call the original NLP.
I don't know how true it is, but I heard, and I've heard this story several times, so I am putting a caveat here that I don't know how true this is, but I was led to believe that originally, you see, Paul McKenna started doing his own courses.
Yeah.
And Richard Bandler wasn't involved.
That's right.
And I was led to believe that he offered NLP courses and Bandler wasn't very happy because of the trademark thing. And rather than it end up going into expensive, long-winded litigation, part of the remedy was that Paul's company would promote Richard in the UK.
Well, that may be possible, but there was never a copyright issue. And Paul took to court to say that Richard Bandler and his company at the time owned the copyright to NLP. Right. And the judge actually said, no, NLP is in the domain. You can't copyright it anymore. And at the time, ANLP England, there's ANLP India, ANLP England. In the original ANLP, which was a committee and had quite a few people on, and I had every position in that committee, we put together a fight to beat Paul McKenna at the courts and raise the money and so on. Then, to tell you the stupidity of NLP, we then got to a rather difficult situation. This is ANLP UK, not the current, the old one. Richard Bandler brought in a 7-day NLP program with, on CDs and all that sort of thing. And we were quite happy to say, yeah, we'll certificate that, we'll accept that as a certificate. But we also had a whole crowd of people in our organisation that wouldn't accept it. They said, oh no, NLP can only be a minimum of 20 days. You can't have a short period. And so we got to a position where Richard Bandler was threatening to sue us for not accepting his certificates, and this other group of people were threatening to sue us if we did accept his certificates. So we were between the rock and the deep blue sea, and ANLP, the old one, folded. And then it was the what you might call the mailing list, and all the information was bought by a young accountant lady who knew nothing about NLP at all, and she then created the new company, which was originally ANLP Limited, and now it's ANLP CIC, Community Interest Company, or I think now they call themselves NLP International. And since then, she's actually done her NLP and done her trainers training and so on. But it's, unfortunately, I fell out with them. I think I'm a bit like you, Jonathan. I fall out with people, not because I fall out with people, they fall out with me. I just call a spade a spade. And if you don't like it, well, I'm sorry, a spade's a spade.
Which is, in the past 20 minutes, that's become abundantly clear that you will say things exactly how you see them. Which is
and the great thing about India is nobody sues you in India. It takes 20 years to get it to court.
So some of these questions I've got penned down here. I'm very much looking forward to your answers, given that you will say what you truly think.
Yeah.
And again, it's nothing personal or offensive, and it's nothing against NLP. If there's people out there who train it, NLP, yes, it works, it gets results, of course it does. So does numerous other things of different names, if it's done in the right way and the person believes it. We're not going there, don't get upset. But I do think NLP, the bits that actually do work in the therapeutic manner, as it were, ironically, have their roots firmly in so-called conventional psychology. And mainly, I mean, NLP, for people who've perhaps not done it, there's lots of terms thrown around, such as anchoring, collapsing anchors, and that's one of the biggest things, which, in layman's terms, it's operant conditioning or classical conditioning, Pavlov's dog.
Yeah, a lot of that's there. I mean, a lot of it you will see repeated or comes out of something called brief psychotherapy. Brief psychotherapy really means problem-driven, solution-orientated. And that's basically what NLP is about, is looking for solutions, not looking for the problems. And some of the people, now, for example, a lot of NLP is based on Milton Erickson, who was a psychiatrist and very clever man. And at the same token, people like Richard Bandler say, oh, psychiatry is a load of rubbish. And yet over half of NLP is based on the psychology, or psychiatry rather, of Milton Erickson, who was a fully fledged psychiatrist.
And those elements do have value, but what I'm going to throw this in, what do you make of Erickson gets out of, he's the grandfather of hypnotherapy and the master of indirect hypnosis. I have a thing out called The Biology of Hypnosis. I'll send you the links to the videos after the interview when you've got nothing better to do. And in there, I spend a good 2 hours putting forward the research I did for a while, because I just get bees in my body. And I did research, and Milton Erickson, in a nutshell, my conclusion was a psychologically deranged, narcissistic, con man who was an incompetent hypnotist, but because he knew he was crap as a hypnotist, he had to try and reframe it, as NLP would call it, and brag about the fact that it might take him 20 sessions to use a conversation to get the change in the client, rather than just going, sleep, you bastard. And he was a pervert who took pleasure from getting women to wear skirts shorter and shorter, putting people in stress positions against walls. And this isn't conjecture. He openly admits these things in his own publication magazine that he put out.
Well, I can go some of the way with agreeing with you. I mean, basically, from my understanding, he was a medical doctor, i.e. psychiatrist, and all the psychiatrists I've known from around that era were totally mad. There's no two ways. I think you have to be mad to be a psychiatrist. And if you're not, do you know in the 1990s, the highest rate of suicides in Canada was psychiatrists. They had the highest suicide rate of all professions in the 1990s. Because you see, psychiatry is a relatively new discipline as far as education is concerned. So yes, I don't think he was a hypnotherapist at all. I think his followers called him a hypnotist. He wasn't a hypnotist. He just used some he used some interesting conversational panel types, and that's it. Full stop. Because I'm sure you know, if you did your research, actually hypnosis came, well, apart from it's always been here, but it was sort of really first discussed and put to paper 5,000 years ago in India. And here, in fact, in the capital of Panjim, capital of Goa called Panjim, there is a statue. I've got a photograph of it somewhere, of a priest of the very early 19th century, and he's got his hands like that, and there's a woman underneath, and he was one of the forerunners of practicing hypnosis in Goa in the 1900s. So as you know, hypnosis is a very old art, and it is an art, because you can't take people's mind. Well, you know this, I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but you can't force anybody to do anything, and the only time you could do it
I disagree with you there, and I disagree with anyone who says that.
Right.
I am actually an advocate that you can make anyone say or do absolutely anything you want, even if it contradicts their morals and values, including things that are considered to be illegal. And yes, that does include creating Manchurian candidates to kill people, obtaining people's computer passwords, bank PIN codes under hypnosis, and creating amnesia so they don't know. And all the stuff that people say can't be done, I know it can be done. I've done it in the real world, in media, and also it's been done and declassified CIA documents show that it was done in MK Ultra.
Well, certainly hypnosis has been used as a part of mind control as torture and all sorts of things, but it's normally also done with either sleep deprivation or pain. Then you'll get in. I mean, pain, you can make anybody do anything normally. I mean, all this James Bond.
Ironically, the pain thing can be done psychologically through the hypnosis itself.
I was going to come on to that there is psychology behind it. Now, for example, you say you can't get anybody to kill anybody, but if I convinced you by various ways that man A had murdered your mother, and I really convinced you with it, you would want to murder that man A. Well, everybody would if they murdered their mother or their child. And it's quite easy to convince somebody that somebody has murdered somebody or done something wrong, because we tend to listen to gossip, and so it's quite easy. You're right to do that. But the true hypnosis is part of the human psyche. It's a stage between awake and sleep, which is natural for everybody. And the use of that natural state is what I think is supposed to make the difference between NLP and hypnosis, is that NLP uses the natural state without saying, in fact, they use the word trance, don't they, without saying it's hypnosis, whereas a straightforward hypnosis person will say, we're going to do some hypnosis now.
Well, with the greatest respect to everyone, I'm going to upset by this. And anyone who goes on hypnosisweek.com, you'll see that this is the consistent standpoint I've taken with everybody. It doesn't matter whether they're hypnotists, helpers, life coaches, it doesn't matter, I don't care whether you're an NLP trainer, practitioner, or a hypnotherapist, or whatever other title you've got. Whether you term it as being trance or state, ultimately, you just alluded to the fact it's the same thing in different contexts. It's all irrelevant anyway, because when the things work therapeutically, the only reason why they work is because it's an important seeming ritualistic process that the individual can buy into, and it gives them the perfect excuse and permission to change, and allows them to remove all self-blame, shame, guilt and regret from themselves for not having got off their arse and done it sooner, which they always could have done, because there's nothing you can do with hypnosis or NLP that can't be done without hypnosis and NLP.
Right. I can follow where you're coming from. The idea of trance, hypnosis, or any other word is what we used to say as school kids, same meat, different gravy. So it all is the same stuff. Now, the only thing I would want to differentiate between is physical disabilities of the brain, right? Down syndrome, etc., and accidents and all that sort of stuff, right? Now, if we put all that stuff to one side, then you're absolutely right. Anything else is an excuse. It's an excuse to be lazy. It's an excuse because I wanted to do something. I wanted to do that, so I did it. We all tend to control ourselves from not doing all the urges that we feel like doing. I'm sure many a person has felt like murdering somebody at some time in their life and raping somebody and all this sort of stuff, but we tend to keep it well.
I'm not so sure about the second one. But the first one, I imagine the majority of people can relate to feeling like murdering somebody at some point.
Yeah. And so our morals tend to keep us in check, and we don't do that. And we don't do it not only for our morals, but for the fear of the consequences. That's why we have, well, not so much in England, in some countries, death penalties. And
I'm sorry, it's going off on one, and I'm not doing clever nested loops. It's just because you mentioned Jimmy Carr before, and then the word rape's come up. He's one of his gags. The man's, he just takes it to the edge. I bought myself a rape alarm recently, so I don't forget when I'm supposed to rape somebody. It's like, whoa.
Well, he's very much on the edge, isn't he, Jimmy?
Yeah, brilliant.
And deadpan sometimes when he says things. So deadpan as if it absolutely means it,
Yeah.
And there is nothing taboo with his subjects, nothing. He'll talk about anything.
I know that will offend some people, and some of his gags offend me sometimes, but that doesn't stop me watching him, because I figure, look, my belief, I'm going to ask you, what's your take on all this political correctness? I get that personally, people should be accepted for who they are, what they want to be, and all this, that, the other. But by the same token, when you start saying you can't do jokes about Irish people, example being, there's a British comedian no longer with us, a guy who was called Bernard Manning.
Oh, yeah.
And he was considered, they used to say he was a racist, sexist, ageist, and everything else you could think of. But Bernard, when confronted with it, would say, well, no, if you actually come and see me live, he said, I take the piss out of black people, white people, Chinese, the list would go on. It'd take him 10 minutes to go through it all. There'd be nobody left. And he said, look who's in my audience. And his audience will contain all of these demographics.
The same with Jimmy Carr, really, to a certain extent.
And
Bernard Manning was famous. Bernard Manning was famous for joining the British Counselling Association.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. There was a picture once of him with his dressing room, Bernard Manning, British Counselling Association. They took a lot of stick for that. It was some years ago now. Funny enough, a friend of mine's wife was the secretary of the British Counselling Association. So anyway, it's a funny old world. But, coming back to, a lot of people, how can we say it? They don't face up to reality. And a lot of people think that they're better than they are, and think they deserve things that they don't deserve. So this is where psychology becomes a little bit complicated, because sometimes I want to say to people, get off your butt and go out and do it. In fact, in one of my tapes, when I did a tape on why what's his name, when you pray, that sort of thing, why it doesn't work, right? And in the beginning of that tape, I say, look, if you're in a bad relationship, get out of it, get a new relationship. If you're in a lousy job, get out of it and get a new job. And instead of staying in it and trying to make it better, because you never will, you should move out. Affirmations was the word I was looking for. Why affirmations don't work? Because they don't work. Because you can't just sit in the mirror and say, oh, God help me, make my wife better, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work. You've got to get off your backside and do something about it. And a lot of people don't want to do that. And I think you referred to that earlier. They don't want to do it. They want the society, the world, to hand them the living and have pity on them. Look, this poor chap, he's got this you know, he had this terrible mother and had terrible father and all this. But, you know, I can give you 1,000 people that had a terrible mother and terrible father who are now, you know, doing well for themselves.
Yeah.
So it's nothing to do with that.
Definitely one side of it. The other side, I feel, is the people that have come to realise that they need to take some personal responsibility. And deep down, they know that they could do, but they don't, because I'm going to paraphrase what I suspect is a thought process that might only take that long in them. That if I do, and suddenly I wake up one morning, and there's people out there who've done this, they wake up and they go, I'm never touching cocaine again, for example. And they don't. And they go cold turkey and they get through it and they never touch it again. And they butt up with the flack they get. But some people mentally know that people who've criticised them for having that addiction, if they were to bump into them, might go, oh, you're looking better. You know, have you stopped the drugs? And they go, well, yeah, I have. And the family might say, well, how did you do that? And he's got to say, well, I just decided. I woke up one morning and said, I'm not doing it anymore, and I haven't. And rather than getting the pat on the back, well done, which they might get briefly, they end up getting attacked like, well, you silly idiot, why did you waste so much of your life? Why didn't you do it sooner? And they end up feeling bad, so that will cause them to relapse. To prove that it wasn't that easy.
Yeah. Well, the other expression you get people saying, yes, but will it last? You know, will it last? And, you know, if you look at the flip side of that, somebody wakes up and stops drugs, what's the difference between that person and the person who wakes up and decides they're a born-again Christian? There's no difference. It's no difference. And you can do that on anything at all. You just come to a conclusion and have a, you know, blow this for a game of soldiers. I'm going to move on to something else, and people do. Drugs, you know, it's a complicated thing because the most important and the most powerful drugs are not controlled. Alcohol, nicotine. One of the most powerful substances in the world for addiction is nicotine. And I say to my students that if Sir Walter Raleigh had picked the next plant, we'd all be smoking marijuana and nicotine tobacco would be illegal. It really would. It was as close as that because he brought the tobacco back, as you know, to England. So, you know, another argument for that is who has got the right to say that anything that grows in the ground and natural you can't use and do, but people do. Now, I'm not in favour of any drugs taken by anybody that causes other people problems. But somebody smoking, I mean, in fact, most of the world now is beginning to become legal, you know, marijuana, for example. And somebody smoking a bit of marijuana instead of a cigarette, I think good sense to them, you know. Marijuana is not addictive, although some people will argue, but it's not. But cigarettes are terribly addictive.
Yeah, it's not physically addicted, but I mean, like anything can be psychologically addictive.
Yes, of
if
course.
You're pre-inclined, yeah.
You can colours. You can be addicted to a colour and only wear the same colour every day. But the couple is, you see, is that people make money. You know David Icke?
Yeah, I know David. We've worked together once.
Oh, well, he was an old friend of mine. I've known him many years. Not recently, but many years ago. In fact, one of my girlfriends in the past was his PA guy, or girl. And I met David many times. Now, the problem is with David is he's gone just a little bit over the edge, you know, of what he says with all these lizard men and everything. But other things that he said were totally correct and totally makes sense. And you can actually put it even to the COVID now. He does a lot about COVID, but one question is, if you want to know what's going on, follow the money. That's all you have to do, follow the money. Follow where all the tobacco money goes, where all the alcohol money goes. A lot of it goes to the governments. Yeah. So why would they want to stop it? COVID in my view of COVID, it is an over-exaggeration and an overreaction to things that happen. People try to say it's not a flu, but technically it is a flu. All flus are COVIDs. That's the COVID, where the name comes from.
Yeah.
It's bad flu. I'm not doubting it's a bad flu, and I've had some friends that have died of it. But it's, you know, the numbers. Look at the numbers. You know, was it Benjamin Disraeli, I think, was quoted as saying there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And statistics you can make work for you. Now, in India, for example, a few months ago, they hit 10 million COVID cases, right? And the BBC, the good old BBC, took to heart, and in their BBC broadcast, they said, headline, India, 10 million COVID cases. And it was so strong that some of my relatives and friends in England were ringing me up, saying, are you all right? Are you all right? What they didn't tell you was two things. One, they didn't say that out of those 10 million, over 9 million have recovered. So there was less than 1 million active cases. And then they didn't tell you that the population of India is 1.4 billion. So 10 million against 1.4 billion is nothing. And in fact, the number that have died, according to the official figures in India, is about 150,000, which is about twice the total number in the UK. Yeah, but the Indian population is 20 times the UK. Yeah. See, you have to really, what we're saying, you have to compare eggs with eggs. You have to compare like with like. And they don't.
BBC, as you say, the British Brainwashing Corporation.
Like that.
It's which segues nicely into mind control. I had a bullet point here because it's now known. You mentioned David Icke; these things kind of go together. During my research for a documentary I've got out called Extreme Danger, Extreme Hypnosis, it's time for the sleepwalking zombies to wake up. I looked at all of David Icke's work. I looked into mind control, how it's used in education, religion, politics. And for example, in England, and anyone who looks at the mainstream media will see that during this virus nonsense, there has been mention of the Behavioural Insights team in Westminster in London. It's been dubbed in the media as the nudge unit. And their sole purpose is to study human behaviour and find ways of nudging people in the direction they want. They've got a complete section looking at the best way to convince people to take the vaccine, for example, and they're employing celebrities and stuff. During this research, I discovered two things. Firstly, that the British Psychological Society share the same office building as the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations that used to be the Tavistock Hospital, which were involved in all the MK Ultra experiments with the CIA, and to this day are still involved in mind control programs. They're linked to the British Psychological Society. That's one thing I discovered, which is a bit disturbing. And secondly, I also discovered that a large amount of politicians, certainly when they reach a certain level, get sent on what I dubbed as being NLP and hypnosis courses, but that there's been courses put together specifically to teach them deceptive language patterns and this, that, the other, to control and manipulate the mass populace. Yeah,
I can agree with a certain amount of that. I'm not sure if it's quite so deliberate, but it's certainly there by intent. I mean, this is what, you see, where Icke goes wrong, in my opinion, just my opinion, he blames it all on a hierarchy, Illuminati, or the lizard people, and so on. But you know, I've been in politics as well. I was in politics in the UK. I was in the times of Maggie Thatcher and so on, right? And I was local councillor, and I realised from the inside that, you know, yes. There is a certain amount of manipulation, but people allow it, and they're manipulated by their peers, not by people above them. So what's happening now, if I can take that and bring it to now, what we've got happening in the world is pure and simple mass hysteria. Mass hysteria churned up and turned up by the media. And when the media say things and people believe it, it turns into this mass hysteria. Now, if you go back to the statistics, and the English government started to do this, they started to give us a statistic of how many extra deaths in a month you got than what was expected. Then suddenly they stopped doing that. But you see, in India, for example, because I've researched this, in India, on average, there are 66,000 people die every day, right? Of everything, of combined everything, right? And so you have to say, well, are we now killing 67,000 people a day or what? And in fact, it's not. And America's the same. When you look at the long term, how many people you expect to die and how many people die, you can look at it and say, oh, look, this month we got all these many more deaths. But if you look at it over the whole year, you haven't got that many more deaths than what you would expect.
And of course, there's the oxymoron, certainly in England anyway, that they stop treatment for certain things, that means that people that would have lived longer of those certain things are dying and becoming part of the figures.
Well, of course, it could also be the other way round, because one of the biggest causes of death in the world is called death by doctrine. You go into hospital and you die. So because of the COVID, you don't go into hospital, so you're still alive. Again, that would affect the figures.
Nice.
And here, I don't know what happens in England, but here I know that if you go into hospital with COVID, the government pay the hospital for looking after you, right? So if you die with COVID, not of COVID, if you die with COVID, then you get the money from the government because you had COVID, right? Lots of people die of everything. I mean, it was a bit like the old AIDS scandal, Nobody ever died of AIDS because AIDS wasn't anything that killed you. So you won't find a death certificate anywhere in the world that says he died of AIDS. He died of, heart attack, bronchial pneumonia or whatever, because AIDS is, acquired immune defense syndrome. It just stopped your immune system working as well as it could. And a similar situation is now happening with COVID, that people are said to die of COVID that didn't. You see, COVID, if you look at the statistics again, mostly old people have died of COVID, a lot across the world. And it's like the final straw that killed them off, because most of them had diseases anyway, heart disease, diabetes, and so on. And once you have a disease that compromises your immune system, anything coming along will kill you off. A lot of people every year get killed off by the flu, and again, they're normally older people. Flu, COVID, call it what you like. But the overall, you probably remember, you don't remember, you won't be around, nor was I, but in 1918, there was the Spanish flu.
Yes.
Spanish flu. It killed off, we don't know exactly, estimates between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. Now, also bear in mind that the population in 1918 was less than half of what it is now. So the actual death rate was phenomenal. And then from 1918 right up to now, every few years, there's a particular flu. You've got the swine flu, the bird flu, the pig flu, the hen flu, the old Uncle Tom Cobley and all flu.
And all of them so far, with hindsight, have turned out, they said, oh, swine flu and this, that, there's going to be X amount of deaths. It's nationally bad. But two things happened. Number one, they didn't close down the country. They didn't lock people down. And number two, nowhere near the figures they predicted happened, which also is still the case at the moment. Nowhere near the figures predicted have happened.
And if you will pardon the pun, all of those flus died out. They just died out. They died a natural death. And nowadays, we've got so many problems. If you take David Icke, because it's from David Icke I got Follow the Money. That was the only thing I really thought he was very good at. Look at the money now. Now, there's, I'm going to oversimplify it, but I think it's the second law of thermodynamics, or maybe the first. No matter can be destroyed, created or destroyed.
Only change form.
Yeah. So money is always there. It's not created or destroyed. But what happens is people lose a lot of money. Now, if somebody loses a lot of money, somebody makes a lot of money. This has always been the same. If there's a big stock market crash and companies lose money, other people make money. Look at the guy who made all the money on the gold, when it dropped. But coming back to what we're doing now, who's making money out of COVID? Well, all the technology companies, Zoom and all that, all making a lot of money. All the pharmaceutical companies, not just the drugs, but the masks, the hands, the PPE equipment, and lots of other things that you wouldn't even think about where people are making lots of money. Amazon, huge amount of money, home deliveries and so on. But I don't know what happened in England, but in India, even though we had all the various lockdowns and all the thing, Amazon kept delivering.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Almost every day.
They've shut all the non-essential shops, but you can buy all those things pretty much off Amazon and get them delivered to your door.
Yeah, yeah. So, what's going on here? What's going on? And that's, a classic case. I'm not a conspiracy theorist per se, because I think that you and I and the rest of the population create our own conspiracies,
or amplify them, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's somebody pulling the strings, the Rockefellers and all that. I don't personally believe that. But I do believe that, the press have got a lot to do with it. Because, I remember years and years ago, somebody said to me, he said, I can tell you the press, he said, it's very simple, dog bites man, no news. Man bites dog, big news. And that's it, because the press are just looking for things that are news. And news is anything that's death, destruction, and not nice.
Well, the saying in the media is, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
In other words, the more severe, traumatic, or painfully graphic the storyline, the more likely it is to be front page.
A good example of that is right now, I'm sure you may or may not have heard, 3 days ago, there was a plane crash, Indonesian plane crash.
Yeah.
But there was only 50 people on board. Only 50 people died, Not like the Malaysian 518 or whatever it was, where 300 people went missing and therefore great conspiracy theories can come out. It hasn't been found and so on. But here they found the wreck straight away. They found the black box, everything. No longer news. No longer news. I'm very sorry for the people, the relatives of those people who have died. It's not considered newsworthy, but COVID is still considered newsworthy. Ridiculous, isn't it?
And there's so much fear mongering, isn't there? I mean, months and months ago, some people got dubbed as being conspiracy theorists, or with the same label, when they were saying one of the best forms of defense against this virus is vitamin D and other vitamins,
Absolutely
wherever
right.
you may be. And now, in January 2021, the mainstream media and the mainstream medical experts and the World Health Organization, all these places have come out finally and said one of the best things you can do is top up on your vitamin D and other vitamins and stuff.
I've been taking them for a year.
Why didn't it come out right at the beginning and say that?
This doesn't make money, Jonathan. It doesn't make money. You can't make money out of vitamins. You can't make money out of food. You can't make money out of anything natural. You have to make money out of something that's been made, and drugs and all that sort of stuff. The reality of it is, if you are fit and healthy, you won't have a problem with any of these diseases. You may get COVID, but 80% of people who get COVID recover, have no problem at all. And about 60% of them have no symptoms. So, what's that? And that's because they're fit, they're healthy, they look after themselves. The vitamin D is an important issue. And, remember they were talking about why our black people and Asian people, why they're dying of COVID. And it was obvious, because they don't get the sun. You can get 5 minutes of sun, but a darker skinned person would have to spend half an hour to have the same amount of vitamin D go into them.
Ah, yeah.
People don't think about that. And also, of course, especially in England and America, which is not the natural home of dark skinned people, they don't get the sun anyway. You don't get so much sun. Now, in India, which is quite a sunny country, there's a lesser amount of problems with COVID because people are taking the sun and the vitamin D and the skin is absorbing it. But a darker skinned person needs up to, 5 or 10 times the amount of sun that the likes of you and I would need. And that was so obvious. Even in America, they were saying, all the Afro-Americans were dying by a greater percentage, and it was simply what you've just been saying, the vitamin D and the lack of sunlight.
And they must have known that, right? Okay, so as you say, the only logical conclusion is that there was no profit to be made out of that. But now we're at a stage where they're making the profits from sources, so now they are coming out. And also it shuts up the people who, can more and more considered respectable doctors did start speaking out and saying, take your vitamin D and do this, that, the
And
other
then
to prevent.
it comes back to your PC, your political correctness again. We can't say that because it's not politically correct. But now it's okay to say that, and now it's more politically correct. I mean, you mentioned political correctness before, and I think that it came to a stage where it went mad. When I was in the local council in Wimbledon, London Borough of Merton, all sorts. I was actually at the time chairman of Merton Sports Council. I was on various governorships of, all that. It's all political. All that lot's political. We had a circular came round. Now, this is how it went like this. You can't call somebody a chairman anymore, right? So they said, okay, well, let's call it a chairperson. So that lasted a little while. And then they said, no, you can't call somebody a chairperson because maybe they're not, So now they just call it the chair. This is the chair of the meeting, And then they had this stupid idea that you couldn't have brainstorming, right? Because brainstorming is unfair to epileptics. This was...
No.
And so they came out with a statement that said, well, what we'll do, we'll call it thought showers. And when I heard this, I was in Goa, and it was in the monsoon season. So I said, why don't we go full hog and call it thought monsoons? But apparently it's okay now to have, this brainstorming. But for a little while it was stopped. The PC changes depending on how the world goes. But, I find it, you can't change a person. A person is a white Caucasian, he's a black African, he's an Indian or a Chinese or a Japanese. That's what they are. And to try and hide it behind some political correctness of a saying, in fact, it itself becomes almost derogatory,
So, I mean, based on that, we live in a world where some elements of it make sense, but some, as you've just said, I would agree, are just ridiculous. But you can have let's randomly make this up, Chinese, a male who's born Chinese, a Chinese man, but we now live in a day and age where if they want to identify as a Danish woman, we can actually face legal proceedings for pointing out that they're quite clearly a Chinese man.
Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? It was a program on television recently, English television, about sexual identity, right? Because there's been a few problems with people having pre-ops and eventually it turned out that there are over 100 ways of calling somebody of their sex. We sort of think about male and female, that's it, but now you've got things like, you've got male and female and homosexual and lesbians and gays and pre-op changes and post-op changes and so on. And it was on to this morning program. They were debating it with that guy from Piers
Morgan.
Piers, I like him. He's great. He gets people going. And they turned out there was over 100 names of how you can call somebody's sex. 100 different ways.
Do you know the only one that there's a couple of them that make total sense. I totally accept that if someone's, biologically born male, but they feel that they're trapped in a man's body and they need that the moment they start that process, that they are arguably female and should be referred to as she. Totally accept that, of course. People should be accepted for who they are. But there are certain contexts where it just becomes ridiculous, almost like it's being done on purpose to control society, divide and conquer.
Were you ever a fan of Star Trek?
I watched it a bit. I wouldn't put myself in the fan camp.
I always remember one particular episode of Star Trek where there was a guy who was painted. This side was black and that side was white. And he was running around on the ship causing havoc, you see. I forget the story, but eventually they got him and sat him down and they found there were two of them. So they sat them both down. And clerk said to one of them, "Look, you're the same. You're both half black and half white." And he said, "Oh no," he said, "he's black on the right half and I'm black on the left half." I thought that made such a mockery of all these silly people. You might as well say, you and I are of a special breed because it doesn't look like you've got much hair on top either. So we have to be, you have to call us bald, but then I'm more bald than you, so I must be more powerful than you are because I've got no hair up here, but then I've got a lot down here. And so, I mean, you're right, it gets ridiculous. It's real splitting hairs, isn't it?
So how, because NLP, because this does take, people listening and watching might have thought we've gone off on one, but I can promise you that everything we've talked about is relevant to NLP because it's relevant to communication, which hypnosis and NLP is. But one of the main tenets is that the territory is not the map.
Yeah, the map is not the territory.
The map is not the territory, rather. I always say that the wrong way around.
That's okay.
And that the expert on the person's thoughts, feelings, emotions, and their modalities and submodalities, what they NLP terms VACOG for people listening, that's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory, their sensory representational system, so to speak. They are the expert on them, and we have to, if you follow the standard NLP route, probably use meta model questioning and such like to find out that person's identity, what their representational system is, and get all this information prior to using whatever process to help them with whatever issue therapeutically.
Okay.
Now, I always just thought, what's the fucking point in that, excuse the language? Bollocks to VACOG, why waste time? I'll just tell them, and one of the standard phrases I use in my sessions, whether it's hypnotically or eyes open, NLP, fied, is I'll just say, imagine it in a way that feels right for you, so they can fill in the blank. It's almost as if, so that whatever they experience, they can never go, well, that's wrong, because it's almost as if. It's almost as if you can taste, smell, see, feel, and or hear everything as 100% total reality in a way that feels right for you. And let them just fill in the bloody blanks. Why bother wasting the time?
Well, yeah, I can understand that. But of course, with my psychology hat on, and I sort of tend to connect some of the dots together here, one of the things we do in our brain is we sort out how to do something, and then it's left there. That is the map, And I tell you, I can see this a lot. You've got an NLP room or a room where you're training people. They come in and they think about where they're going to sit, and they find a place and they sit down, and you get on with the morning. Now, if at lunchtime you move all those chairs around all over the place, just for fun, move them all over the place, and watch them come back in, because they come back in, they follow the map in their head because they made it earlier. Oh, my chair's there. Oh, this isn't my chair. And they sort of sit in amazement for a few seconds, because they then have to start doing it all over again. And that's basically because humans are lazy creatures. In fact, if you look at evolutionary psychology, there's none of this women and children first rubbish. It's me first. We have this desire to be first and be there and be everything, because if we don't, we won't survive. The guy, what's the guy's...
Maslow, hierarchy of needs?
No, the new guy that writes all the books on evolutionary biology. I can see his picture, but I can't get his name for the moment.
Not Dawkins.
Dawkins, yeah.
Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins. One of his books is called The Selfish Gene.
Yeah.
Where he explains that humans are selfish. And we are. We're incredibly selfish. It's me first. And that's all there is to it. But in the evolutionary biology, a lot of it can be explained because the brain is lazy. It makes something up and then it just wants to carry on the same thing. We call that a habit, don't we? We call it a habit. Some habits are good. You don't have to think about how to tie your shoelaces. You can just do it. But if you have to think about it, it takes up too much time. So we tend to want to turn everything to a habit. And that's where the idea, and it was one of the linguistics, wasn't it? Chomsky that said the map is not Chomsky. Yeah, Noel Chomsky. Where he came, didn't come from NLP. But, truthfully, NLP is not anything. It was not, Richard Bandle and John Green to take the claim for it, but it's not. They just copied everybody else's and put it together.
Oh, copied? No, you mean model, don't you?
Yes, sorry. Yes, it modelled everybody else's. But, there's nothing wrong with that, actually, because lots of people have done it in the past.
Of course, it's gone on forever, yeah.
Of course, even that famous psychologist, the guy, the womanizing drug addict, Sigmund Freud. Right?
Sigmund Freud, yeah.
The womanizing drug addict. Now, he copied a lot from other people, and they all copy, and they all go back. And of course, depending on where you come from, if you come from a religious sect of any type, you can trace it back to your religion, to whether it be Christianity, whether it be Hinduism or Muslim or anything else. You can trace everything back to that, because there's nothing new under the sun. It's only put together in different ways. And that's all. And the way NLP is put together, it's quite an easy way for people to understand some basic psychology, because all of it is just basic psychology. People will follow other people. There is always a leader. You throw 20 people together in a room, within half an hour a leader will develop, and if it doesn't, there'll be two leaders. They'll break into two groups. We've known this for hundreds of years, and yet NLP makes it like it's brand new. This is very interesting. This is NLP. So a lot of it is just normal psychology. That's why at the beginning I used to call it pop psychology. But it is there are some interesting connections that go together. I mean, yes, of course, we're taught we have 5 senses. Actually, you have 22 senses. A human being, and there's arguments, some people say 21, but 21 or 22 totally independent senses. But we only really talk in NLP about the 5 senses, because they're what we immediately react with the world. We see, we hear and feel, and smell and taste and so on. But at the same time, you want a better balance. Are you in balance? Is the floor like that? That's a sense. You don't really think about it. And when you're doing this VACOG, are you feeling hungry or thirsty? They're all senses. They go on in the body. Then you have senses you don't even know about. That how do you know your arm's been lifted up, and you have to react the muscle? There's certain tension stresses in all your muscles. So it's easy just to take a simple approach. And I think most average human beings are just looking for a very simple approach to put themselves on a relatively straight and narrow path, so they don't upset people. And NLP has that advantage of doing that. It gives you enough information to put you on a nice, comfortable path to stop you reacting. And when you add this timeline stuff in as well, it stops you reacting, stops you being angry, makes you a bit relaxed. And it's very easy to say, it's your model of the world. You're okay. You can do that. And if you did that with everybody all the time, life would be very peaceful. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that, because I want to have a better model of the world than you do. Remember, who was it that said, I think it was George Orwell out of Animal Farm, wasn't it? It was pigs, but we often say all men are created equal, right? And that wit guy,
some more equal than others.
Yeah, said some are more equal than others. And that's so true. That's so true, is what we are. And if our world is not disturbed, we don't call it any problem. But as soon as our world is disturbed in some way, we get problems. And I'm almost like this with NLP. Yes, it's good. Yes, it's simple. Yes, it's a bit of psychology, but it's not real psychology. But the thing is, as we said right from the beginning, if for you it works and it makes you a calmer and better person, and maybe even make you more money and enable you to survive in this world of COVID and lizard men and everything else, then there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Of course not. Now, there's some standout. There's a couple of standout famous techniques, important seeming ritualistic processes, call them what you will, within NLP. And they do have the roots in stuff that predates it being relabeled as NLP, as you've already acknowledged. Let's just look at a couple of these. One of them in particular that I use a heck of a lot, and I was using before I ever encountered NLP, because to be honest, I was hypnotizing people back in 1989 when I was 14, dealing with clients, and I was using this technique.
You're just a young man. Amazing.
Back then. And I hadn't looked into NLP, and when I did, I was like, oh, they've just renamed idiomotor responses and parts therapy and put it together and called it this 6-step reframe.
That's right.
Which obviously was published in Frogs into Princes by Bandler and Rinder.
Yeah.
But see, in recent years, and this is leading to a question, in recent years, people have repackaged, and they're doing it all the time, repackaged to sell apparently new techniques and courses, everything from all pain to go, drain that pain, flipping, oh Christ,
law of attraction,
and all of them ultimately are just idiomotor response, direct communication with the unconscious, subconscious mind, and effectively it's the 6-step reframe. How often do you use that particular technique a lot? It's one that I use a hell of a lot. Supposedly the 6-step reframe is superseded by parts integration, because the 6-step means you have to make another part and talk to that part and all that. So we tend to cut that out. But reframing per se, I always say, is the most powerful thing you can do for anybody and anything. And the other thing which I brought in is this, and this is a very important concept, is that there is no such thing as right or wrong, positive or negative, none. Everything just is. Everything just is. It's the viewer or the very
user.
Buddhist and Zen.
Yeah, but the viewer or the user makes it right or wrong for them. So we tend to use the term useful or not useful rather than right or wrong or good or bad or anything, because you see, there's no such thing as an absolute truth. There can't be. Truth is relevant to the way you're looking at it and relevant to your background and everything else. And truth is only relevant to you at this moment in time. Now, I can take this and I can say this is a great pen. This is a good pen.
It's like a magic wand.
Yeah, and it's great for picking the nose, because it clears the nose out quite nicely, especially this end, it's even easier. Somebody else could look at this and say, oh, that's a horrible pen. It's a horrible colour, it's grey and it leaks all over your hand. No, it's rubbish, it's crap. But does this change? No, it's still a pen. I remember a nuclear physicist, the famous nuclear physicist said to me, he said, I'm not going to go too heavy into nuclear physics, but the basic building block of everything is an atom. Okay, but I think we'll all accept there's an atom. And in the atom, you've got a nucleus and you've got a proton and a neutron that spins round. And they're kept apart by electrical charge. Okay, but if they weren't kept apart, this would collapse, the whole world would collapse and nothing would exist, so it's kept apart. Now, he said, it doesn't matter whether you call the nuclear positive or negative. Makes no difference whatsoever. We can change it and call it positive, we can call it negative. It makes no difference to the atom. It's still an atom, and it's still kept apart, and it still won't collapse. And that's the basic building block of everything. There's no difference between positive and negative. And that's the same thing in life. There is no positive, and there is no negative. Whatever you concentrate on, you'll get. You can concentrate on, let's say, a lovely long-haired blonde girl with big legs and big, and if you concentrate on it enough, it'll come into your life because that's all you're looking for, right? Or you can say, oh, I don't like them, and I'm only going to concentrate on this, and that will come into your life. And this is, what they like to brand as the law of attraction, but it's not. It's just, what do you want? Do you want long-haired blondes or do you want short-haired brunettes?
It's what you're focusing on. You're excluding the other.
That's right, exactly.
Conventional psychology would say it's what you've kind of handed over to your reticular activating system to focus on.
Exactly. And, people blow all this out of all proportion, especially here. You can get law of attraction, you can pay fortunes for a law of attraction, and they have big groups, and let's all concentrate on money and we'll get money. Well, in my world, I have this quote that says, the only time success comes before work is in the dictionary. You've got to go and do your work.
Yeah.
So, so many people just want a free lunch. They just want to find an excuse for, this is where we started. You said at the very beginning, most people just don't want to do any work. They just want a nice, cheap way. If I can blame it on psychology, if I can blame it on the universe, if I can blame it on you or me or anybody else, I don't want to take responsibility for it. Remember I was saying about David Icke. When I first met David Icke, the latest edition of the American Psychological Association Diagnostic and Statistic Manual,
DSM 5 being the latest one.
DSM-4 had just come out. I think it was anyway. It just come out, and for the first time, they'd put ADHD as a disease and ADD as a disease. And I was having breakfast with David when this happened, and I said, it was a joke. He didn't realize it was a joke. I said, they actually thought about putting RDD in as well, the responsibility deficit disorder. Anybody can claim that. I've got no responsibility for this. And he actually thought I was serious, and he opened up his speech an hour later with that story about RDD going into the... It put me off a little bit about him when he doesn't check his facts, But I'd tell you something else. With ADHD coming in, what went out as a mental disorder? But homosexuality. In the same edition went out. So up until, I think that was 1995 or something like that. So up until 1995, homosexuality was a psychological disorder. And then suddenly, boom, it no longer was.
Well, a lot of viewers and listeners, you'll be aware because of your background, but a lot of viewers and listeners may have heard of DSM-5, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of...
Yeah, it's basically all the illnesses.
But they may not realise that it's actually just voted on by a committee as to what should go in it or be thrown out.
But what makes it even worse is it's legally binding. If you can prove from the DSM that you've got 5 or, depending on the disease, you've got 5 or more characteristics of this, then you are OCD or you are depressive or whatever. And the law backs it up.
Which is ironic because for most of the things, for a large majority of them, my studies show me that you could take any random person off the street and get them to fit more than one of the things in...
That's right.
The book.
They could be as mad as a hatter or sane as you like, depending on what you do. And also things change. I don't know if you know, but there's a couple of sort of really modern things coming out now. One is on depression. And they're now considering that depression is a natural state, a bit like the fight, flight or freeze. Right? Mm-hmm. So you've got fight, flight, freeze, depression. And that depression protects you from problems. And so they're now looking at it as a naturally occurring state that sometimes gets pushed out of too much. So depression may in fact even come out eventually when they realise that it isn't really a bad thing. But of course the pharmaceutical people don't want that because the Prozac...
Too much money in it. No, exactly.
And another thing, also quite new thinking, is on this idea of consciousness. They say that consciousness is the hard question. What is consciousness and so on? Well, there's a whole big group of scientists that are now thinking that consciousness can become one of the forces of the universe. The 4 great forces that we say in everything, it's electromagnetic, gravity, weak and strong nuclear force. But now they think that maybe consciousness is another force and that it is everywhere. And we tap into it as we need it.
It's interesting that things like that, the now so-called, sorry, I've just got a slightly itchy ear with the earphone, that the so-called conventional, respectable scientists and experts, as opposed to your conspiracy theorists or New Age tree-huggy types. But your New Age tree-huggy types have said forever that consciousness is part of it. There's a universal consciousness that we tap into. That your likes of the mental block, Nikola Tesla and the great inventors were tapping into that apparently.
And so everything, what goes around comes around. But and the other thing that I've always get on my hobby horse about is that most of what we know is actually not true. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you see, you listen to the words and people say, oh, there's this theory and that theory, but theory is not truth, right? And the classic example of this is Big Bang Theory. Big Bang Theory is being pounded everywhere as an absolute truth, but it's not. It's only a theory. It's the biggest one we got at the moment, but there are other theories of the creation of the universe. And most things we do are theories. There's very few absolute truths. And yet so many people take a theory and call it an absolute truth, which brings us back to COVID-19. There are theories about it, but people take them as absolute truths. But they're not absolute truths.
Especially if a perceived authority figure or alleged held up to be respectable, because, you know, certain newspapers, magazines and news outlets, the majority of the mass populace go, well, if it comes from that source, it must be true. But over here, it must be a nut job.
Dr. Fauci, for example, the American guy, you know, if he says it's got to be true, but he's just the same as you and I. He's no different to anybody else. He's got his own ideas and theories. And that's where, you know, the whole thing gets problematic, where the whole, if you like, conspiracy theory comes in, is because so many people are holding out that their truth is better than the other person's truth, and so it goes on ad infinitum. And the same thing's happening now. They want to impeach Donald Trump again, and he's refusing to say goodbye and shake Biden by the hand, but then Mike Pence, as the deputy guy, has jumped in and said, oh, well, I'll shake him by the hand. You know, it gets ridiculous, the whole thing. And if that happens at that high echelon of society, if you get whatever your politics are, but if you see a president of the free world, so to speak, right, doing strange things, how can a 15-year-old boy looking at this make sense of what's right or wrong in the world anymore? You can't, can you? It's just ridiculous. And this happens everywhere, you know.
How much through the media, because you did mention the media earlier, in my experience, I'd like your view on this, I find a lot of clients, I know we talked about them having to take responsibility or not, slightly different than that, get stuck in you spoke about fight and flight. Well, there's fight, flight, freeze or shite. I believe it's now getting dubbed. You either kill dinosaur, run like the clappers from Dinosaur,
or stand still and
shit, hoping that the smell will get rid of dinosaur, or freeze, where you go, what shall I do? Shall I run away? Shall I fight? Shall I run away? Shall I fight? And you become confused and disorientated, and well, then it's just too bloody late because you're frozen. And I think a lot of human beings through everyday life, through taking on board the fear that's instilled into them, or the confusion and disorientation and uncertainty fed into them through the media outlets, reporting on the perceived authority figures and this, that, the other, get stuck in the freeze. I don't know what to do.
I just give up. Don't bother. I'll do nothing.
And then they may end up in front of somebody like your good self. And I think a large amount of what we do is to just unstick them from that freeze.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the freeze means you do nothing. You stay as you are. If you look anywhere, I mean, I'm looking in Goa, but you can look in England, the rule says you wear a mask. How many people do you see not wearing a mask? How many parties carry on? How many things carry on? So that, if it metaphorically is the freeze, I'm not going to go with the rules, and I'm not going to go against the rules. I'm just going to do what I've always did, which is, you know, most people stay in their comfort zone, what I've always done, right? So yeah, this freezing is a good way of putting it. Why should I change? You know, if I get COVID, I'll die. If I get run over by a bus, I die. If a lightning strikes me, I'll die. You know, and lots of people get died by buses. Interesting enough, I don't know about in England, but in India, in the early part of the COVID, the number of people that died on the road dropped dramatically because people weren't going out on the road. So there again is if you look at all this, again, a disproportional figures, because they change. You have to take everything into account. But coming back to your saying, yes, freezing Another way I would put it is probably not bothering. Why should I bother? I can't do anything. I can't make any difference. I'm just a little tiny man here. I can't make any difference to the Prime Minister or the President or whatever, so I just won't bother. And that, in a way, is a form of freezing, isn't it? Staying as you are. And I think a lot of people are going with that, what we would call the status quo.
And yet NLP also says, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
So if you want something different, do something different. Yes, and I agree with that. You see, that if you're happy, look, if you're a pig in shit all day long and enjoying every minute of it, why do you want to get that pig, wash him down and put him into, mother care? Because he'll be unhappy. So you leave the pig where he is. You leave the horse where he is. You leave the cow where he is. When it comes to animals and plants, you don't want to say, "Oh, I've got to change that tree. That tree's growing very ugly. I've got to go and get some surgical spirit and cut these off." And no, you don't do that. But we do it with humans, don't we? We say, "Oh, I must change something. I don't feel comfortable here. I'll move." But there are people, I can tell you, there are lots of people that are perfectly happy in what they do. There was a great American guy, and I can't think of his name for the moment. He was a commentator, and he used to talk about sheep and shepherds, right? Mm-hmm. So you have a flock of sheep, and you have a shepherd that looks after them. Now, what would happen if the sheep become the shepherd? And what happens in life is that we have sheep. We need sheep, whatever you want to call them. I'm trying to be polite, but dustmen, sewage workers, bricklayers, builders, they're all people that we need, right? Oh, yeah. Now, if all those people became bosses, I want to be the boss, well, who's going to do the work? Who's going to be the sheep? They're not there anymore. So, the theory is this: if you're happy being a sheep, be a sheep. If you're happy in what you do, do it. If you're not happy and you want to move out, that's also okay. But you don't want to deliberately make everybody unhappy to move out of the sheep position and become shepherds, because you've got too many vacancies for sheep. And I think that's something that I've come across, I'm sure you have, I've come across loads and loads of people in the world that are perfectly happy in what they do. Leave them alone, they're perfectly happy. Whether they're going thump, bang, thump on a conveyor belt every day, picking up rubbish, or cutting people open, surgeons, they're happy at what they do. And if they're happy at what they do, which is very much against if you always did what you always did. If you're happy always doing what you always did, then carry on doing it. Yeah. And don't bother and don't change people. But people that are not happy, they're the ones that you can change and work on. And there's not as many of those as you think. Obviously, we sometimes look with blinkered eyes because I only see people that come to me for help. I had a very good friend of mine. She passed on now, but she was a real dichotomy, because she was a police surgeon, which is about one of the most traditional doctors you can think of, and at the same token she was totally alternative. She had all the alternative stuff and went in all of it. And the arguments I used to have with her, she used to say, there is so many drug addicts in London. She was in London. Oh, this place is full of drug addicts. But the reality was that in her daily work, all she saw was drug addicts. It's the blinkering effect again. All she saw was drug addicts. Therefore, there was a high percentage of drug addicts everywhere. And so whatever you do, whether it be
slight little freeze there. Will it unfreeze?
Correction. Or we seem to have lost the connection.
No, we've unfrozen. It's okay.
Oh, good. Okay. Or the surgeon and so on. So whatever you do, you're blinkered into thinking that's your little bit and the whole world is like that. And that's probably one of the problems in the whole world, is allowing people to be what they want to be. I have this philosophy that says, I say, first be yourself. Be yourself. That's number one. Number two is let others be themselves. And number three is don't put yourself on others. And I think if you did that, if everybody did that, life would be a much more pleasant Well, because I can be who I am and you can be who you are.
I agree. I think one of the big problems, and it's very much what you've just said, just from a slightly different way of saying it, really, is the people getting conditioned by seeing celebrities on TV and in the media and stuff, and thinking they've got to always aspire to more, the keeping up with the Joneses thing, where in truth, the person down the street with the bigger house and the bigger car may actually be massively more in debt than you. It doesn't actually necessarily mean they're happier.
And I think also the stars, whatever you want to call it, the pop stars and so on, are keeping up with the lower people. You see pop stars now going heavily for tattoos because they feel that they have to associate with the tattooed community of the world. So I think it works both ways. I think the star is just as much wanting to be recognized by the public and step to the public's level as the public is trying to recognize the star and step to the star's level. And I can tell you from my experience of working with people that the most mixed up, craziest people in this world are entertainers, professional entertainers. Some of them are terrible. I knew one, I can't mention his name, but he was very well known. I might say he had a slightly different hand. I don't think he's alive now, but anyway.
Jeremy Beadle is sadly no longer with us.
Yeah, well, then I can probably say more about him because he was one of my clients at one time. And he would come out of his production, wherever he was doing, or show, or whatever, come home and cry his eyes out because he was basically very lonely. And some of these people are. And
also self-sabotage. I know I did actually meet Jeremy at a magic convention because magic was one of his big hobbies.
It was,
and
right. Yes.
He did... I was very young at the time, and he gave me advice. So I said, how do you know when you perfected something type of thing? And he said, you've just got to learn to trust the audience reaction. The truth is, you'll never think it's good enough. You'll probably end up back in your hotel room thinking, just beating yourself up about everything that went wrong, rather than focusing on the good things.
Very good advice he gave you, because that's what he used to do. So it's great. So yeah, I think I'm running a bit out of time. I don't know how you.
We have come in very close to the end. So please, before I'm sorry it's gone off on one, but what, people watching and listening, there's pure gold in this. As I always say, get a pad and a pen, and if you're listening to the audio one, go to hypnosisweek.com and click and go and watch the video one as well. You get the facial expressions and body language. Take notes. There's tons to learn from this that's relevant to all areas of life, as well as, of course, to therapy. And with that in mind, David's links will be below this video or below the podcast. Tell them a little bit about what they can find out and come and learn from you, because I know you've got various books out there, you've got training programs you do.
Well, I run training programs on all levels of NLP, from beginner to master trainer. I run hypnosis, psychotherapy and coaching. That's basically what I do. And the great thing about people that don't live in India is that it's much, much cheaper here. The practitioner program is £400 if you look at English money, and the master practitioner is £800. You can't get that sort of quality of training anywhere else for that sort of money.
And you can have a cultural holiday built in.
Yeah, well, I get people coming, I often get people come once a year for practitioner, master practitioner and trainer, all back to back. It's about a month, and they come in from America, from everywhere. And they still, with their air flight, with their accommodation, everything else, they still get change from the average practitioner program or master practitioner program. So one thing we have to offer is very cheap. It has to be cheap because the Indian economy is about a tenth of Europe or America. So everything is about 10 times cheaper. That I do. I do take on, one-to-one programs for people, but not as much as, rather I take on too much. I'm trying to keep that back. So yes, we run all the main programs on NLP, and we certify with all the major certification bodies. I'm an American Board of NLP trainer, I'm an ANLP trainer, NLTA, the lot. We cover everything, you know. And I'll put it another way round. Everybody accepts my certificates because I'm too old and I've been around a long time, and nobody will argue with me, you know. And ANLP India, that's the proper name, ANLP India, as opposed to ANLP CIC UK. ANLP India is the only organisation that is truly democratic and free. There's no charge to join ANLP India. You can go anlp.in and join for free. No monthly charge, but there's no certification date that runs out, anything like that.
Nice.
And all our certificates are valid for life. The only certificate that's not valid for life is the certificate I would give you so you could join one of the other organisations who will charge you every year to be a member of it, which is ridiculous. And for Indian situation, it's so bloody expensive. You know, we haven't even talked about coaching, but ICF, International Coaching Federation, costs me $350 a year just to belong to them. Ridiculous amount of money. I mean, okay, maybe not big for Americans and maybe even Europeans, but it's still a lot of money, and especially for Indians. Yeah. So our coaching organisation, ANLP Coaching, free. You know, I believe everything, you know, let's be reasonable. Let's share our costs. Let's share our information for a minimum of cost. And that way more people can involve. If you want to come to Goa and do our courses, I'll even give you free accommodation. So that can't be bad. So you just get on a plane. I think a plane from England to Goa is £500 at the moment, return. Well, I think they've just opened it up. 16th of or they're going to open it up on the 16th of January, so you can fly to India. It's £500, and you can stay here very, very cheap. You know, a couple of £100 will keep you for a month in food and drink and everything else. It's a very cheap country, you know.
That itself, as well as the fact that, look, over the past, and we did overrun over the past hour and 40 minutes, we're going to wrap this up now, but over the past hour and 40 minutes, David has covered so many areas of everyday life that at first listening or sight, you might think, what's that got to do with NLP? Watch, listen again, and you'll realise the penny will drop. If you liked his style of discussion, I can pretty much confidently say that's a good example of the way he would be training you too, as well.
Yeah, yes, yeah. We have a very democratic training process. I have obviously have to cover all the necessary bits, but we'll go off in tangents if the group want it and they want to know. In fact, today we had quite a long session on dreaming. A subject that people are interested in, and rapid eye movements and deep sleep and are dreams real and all this sort of stuff. So, you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff that people want to know, and I don't vary from the NLP program. So we have the basic requirement for all the organizations in the world to say you've been trained to practitioner, master practitioner or trainer. Yeah. But wherever possible, we throw in other things that the students want to know. I don't ban any question. I don't shy away from any question. If I really don't know it, I'll say, I'm sorry, I don't know it, but I'll find out for you and let you know tomorrow. There's so many trainers that think they're little deputy gods, you know, and I've seen them. They don't even socialise with the students because, no, keep away from them. Me, I sit on the floor with them, drink with them, eat with them. I've got a roof terrace, you know, everything. So, you know, they say you pays your money, you takes your choice. It's as simple as that.
Excellent. Good. Well, nice thank you so much for...
It's nice to connect with you again over all these many, many years.
Yes.
And I'm sure that we will...
For viewers and listeners that don't know, David also is interested in magic. I know some of my viewers and listeners are into magic. That's magic as in rabbits out of hat style magic, not rituals and stuff.
Yes.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, and some of the rules of magic are so great. You know, the misdirection. Look over here. Great. Okay.
I find a lot of crossovers. Thank you, David. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Nice.
And thank you, viewers and listeners. Please share this around your social media platforms, help spread this knowledge and advice. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.